When does someone become a master? Is it the amount of time spent on a craft or the success you achieved with it? In this Adorama original series, we'll travel throughout the United States and discover people who spent countless hours perfecting their craft and finding their own voice. Because being a master today means being able to recognize that voice and inspire people to find their own.
I think the core of photography goes back to lighting. My name is Woelfel. I'm a freelance photographer based in New York. I got my start kind of drawing and painting. Throughout schooling, that's kind of when I got my start and introduction into photography. And then as I graduated, I was so head over heels for it. That's when I decided to pursue it full time. I would kind of describe my style as like enchanting and colorful. So I've always just been a very visual person. I've always been so into the arts, whether it was drawing or painting. And I think those are really the core things that I see when I'm looking at my photography now and how they have really created an impact on the photos I create day to day. It's funny looking back at my old work in different mediums. Anytime I do look back at that old kind of work, I've always used like vibrant colors, and I don't exactly know like kind of how to relate that back to. I think I've always just been drawn to bright colors, and I think that also just shows in my work. I rarely have a big team around me. If anything, it's usually just me and the subject I'm shooting. And I think as I've grown within my photography and sharing my work online, I've kind of opened up that passageway for people to look into what I'm shooting, and now they can see how easy it can be for them to create the same thing. I just personally love when a background looks like really creamy and out of focus. And I think for what I shoot, it really helps because a lot of the time, sometimes my locations are not pretty at all. So being able to shoot at a really low aperture has kind of helped kind of blur out unnecessary things. I'm very simple with what I shoot. I don't like to bring a lot of gear or heavy lights with me, but with that comes a lot of post-production work and efforts to take things away or add things that weren't there. When I'm out shooting, I like to get a lot of variety within my shots, and with that comes a lot of location changes, lighting changes, and outfit changes too. But the challenges that come with that are not being too particular about hair and makeup, or if the outfit is a little bit wrinkled. Those are things that I personally will take into the edit, and that sometimes can be a double-edged sword because although I'm pretty fast and able to get this shot on site, in the edit I'm doing a lot to kind of backtrack that and save it, and sometimes I run into a lot of trouble. One way I go about preparing for a shoot is just creating a moment within wherever I'm at. So sometimes I'll just bring my camera and hope that there's something cool that I'm going to capture, and sometimes that's not the case and I walk home with no photos, but at least I had a good time. Other times there is something cool that we run into and I'm able to create a really cool photograph out of not even kind of planning everything. When I'm working with clients, I definitely have to prepare more. So whether I'm kind of sketching or going through Pinterest to look for inspiration and coming up with a mood board, there's just so much more that goes into it and that I have to think about. And sometimes I actually like doing that preparation because I realize that when it comes down to the actual shoot, I either have like a list I can reference or kind of a shot list, and it helps move things kind of go through seamlessly, but it's definitely a different approach. For the most part, I don't really go into a shoot like with an exact scene that I want to recreate. It more kind of is free-flowing, and I think that's what's super cool too about working with people is that even models sometimes will bring up an idea or a pose that I wasn't thinking of, and that can just change the entirety of the shoot. I actually started out just shooting on my iPhone and using iPhone editing apps, and I realized how much I was getting into photography, and that's when I got my first DSLR. So I think my first camera was a Nikon 5200, and from there I've kind of upgraded since. And now I shoot with the Nikon Z7 II. That's kind of my go-to camera. It is a mirrorless camera, so it's a little bit different than what I've been shooting with in the past few years, but I actually really love kind of how even just like modernized it feels. And then I have the 35mm f1.4 lens. That's kind of glued onto my camera at this point because I use it so frequently. And then also for video, I really like to use the 24-70 f2.8 lens. I'm definitely like an overthinker sometimes, and I like to bring more than what I need. So I will sometimes bring like 3 batteries even for like an hour shoot, which like doesn't make sense. But for me, it just feels safe knowing that my camera is gonna stay alive. And then also with me now has come a lot of lens filters. I've recently got into these lens filters, and these are very like unique. So they don't always come into play, but when they do, they really change up the whole scene. And I really like the look and feel of it when I want to go for it, but it's definitely something that is a choice and like a stylistic choice. I really like to be pretty handheld and light with the gear and the props that I'm using. So I use these kind of small RGB LED video lights, and I have like 4 of them now because I've come to realize how useful they are. These kind of small, lightweight LED lights have become super useful within my shoots because I'm not really sure what kind of foreground lights we're gonna run into or if my model's gonna be well lit enough. And having these in my back pocket and just in my camera bag have been so useful because I can light my model anywhere I go. When I go to open a photo, that file is usually, or for the most part, always shot in RAW. So I will double click the RAW photo and that will prompt me into Camera Raw within Adobe Photoshop. And so from there, I always like to play with the temperature and the tint and the exposure. I'll really go into each slider and play with every single one, making sure I don't miss anything because I think each one plays such a big part. And then from there, I always play with split toning, so kind of using my knowledge of complementary colors. If the model is too green, just bringing those reds a little bit up so we can kind of get a little bit more of a natural look. And something I always do also is playing with the noise reduction and the luminance there. So because I'm shooting in pretty low light most of the time, or my model's not really well lit, the noise reduction comes in handy a lot because I'm able to bring down the grain, and that just has the photo look a little bit more painterly, which I really like in my end result photos, but I always will kind of combat that by boosting up the clarity or sharpening up my image as well. After that, I'll open up my photo into actual Photoshop, and from there, I can kind of get another look at it from a different lens because I'm always so set in on Camera Raw and I get overwhelmed with what I'm doing. So bringing it back into actual Photoshop and being able to play with it further has been super useful. Within Photoshop, there's so many tools that I love to use that I find myself editing a photo for over an hour sometimes because I'm never satisfied with how it looks. And then I also like to play with vignetting and presets. I really like to use everything that's available. I think for anyone starting out, especially if you're not too knowledgeable yet within having a camera or using editing software, I would recommend just taking photos of yourself. That's kind of how I got started. I would just create photos of myself because whenever I was inspired in the moment, I was the only one there. So taking self-portraits for me has also been a really cool part of my process, and learning how to be in front of a camera can aid you in being behind it as well. And then from there, reach out to your friends, your family, or even new models to shoot. And I think it's all about just gaining experience. So every time you go on a shoot, you're gonna do something wrong. And from the next shoot you create and plan, you'll learn from that mistake, and just moving forward, experience is key here. So just continue to shoot and, don't let anyone stop you.